that having been said, in our Canberra studio, I believe, is the Minister for, among other things, Energy and Environment, Josh Frydenberg. Good evening, Josh.
Nice to be with you, Richo.
Now, before I get on to the great national issues that I want to cover with you and about energy and you know, gas and coal and all the rest of it, I note you're getting into a blue with the West Australians over what to do about sharks. Now, I suppose Western Australia has maybe as many shark attacks as New South Wales, because New South Wales has had a spate of them, as you know, up in the north coast. But we had a young girl taken, I think, only a matter of a month ago or so. What are you proposing? Because it seems to me it is the sharks' ocean. I mean, what do you want to do to them?
Well, Western Australia has had 15 shark attacks that have resulted in the deaths of people in just the last 17 years, and this is a much higher proportion than other states. And in Western Australia, they don't have the smart drum lines that you can find in New South Wales, or the nets that you find in both New South Wales and in Queensland. Indeed, Queensland have had nets since 1962, and New South Wales first put them in on the beaches in 1937. So I've been calling on the Western Australian government to take more dramatic action to protect its citizens ahead of the sharks. And where they need to put in nets, they will require federal government approval, which would come from me. And I've said repeatedly, I'm prepared to consider that fully and promptly. And I just call on the Western Australian government to follow the lead of Queensland and New South Wales and take dramatic action to protect its citizens.
If we're only talking about nets, I can live with it. But of course, some people talk about culls. Now, you're not pushing a cull, I hope.
Well, I've said I've been open to a cull because, as you know, in Western Australia they have killed some sharks,
yes,
and I'll do whatever it takes to protect human life. You see, since they put in New South Wales these smart drum lines, which effectively two buoys, an anchor, and a hook connected to a satellite controlled transmission system, where the shark gets hooked, scientists come out, they tag the shark, they capture it, then they send it out to sea. That's a non-lethal means that have protected people in New South Wales waters. And in fact, 24 great white sharks have been caught that way in just the last 5 months. So I don't, for the life of me, understand why Western Australia doesn't go down this path to put in smart drum lines and indeed nets to protect its citizens.
No, I agree with that, but the last West Australian government who had the shark cull, I mean, it's absurd. You can't go out and find the guilty shark. They're not going to confess. So I think it's just beyond belief that we actually think that, you know, oh, we'll go and kill a great white shark because someone was taken. I think I'd rather your approach. That's systematic. I can't object to that. I hope the West Australians can see the light. Now, that having been said, we've got to keep the lights on, and that's been a bit of a problem in recent times. Now, first off, I noticed Malcolm Turnbull announced, and I think it's a good policy, I'm not critical here, a policy on gas to try and make sure that we kept some gas rather than just exported it all over the place. Now, has it actually made a change? Like, was that sufficient to make certain that we keep enough gas here to keep our energy needs going?
Well, certainly the Prime Minister has sent some very strong signals to the gas companies, which has already made a difference. We've seen some companies get gas contracts that they previously couldn't get, and we've also seen the gas-fired power station in South Australia called Pelican Point announced that it will now come online. Previously it had been mothballed, and that is a result of the owner Engie and the company Origin reaching an agreement. Now, what the Prime Minister has said is he wants to put in place export controls so that we preserve enough gas to be used at home. And that's just common sense, because this is a East Coast problem. 2/3 of the gas we produce on the East Coast is being exported, and 1/3 is being kept for domestic use. And we've even got export companies buying gas off the domestic market, which should be going to households and to businesses merely to meet their export contracts. So we're going to rely on the best available advice from the Australian Energy Market Operator and from the ACCC to put those gas controls. But I have to say to you, Richo, that's only part of the solution. The other big part of it is to get the state governments, and I include the Labor governments here of Victoria, the Northern Territory in particular, but also the coalition government in New South Wales, to drill more gas, both conventional and unconventional onshore gas in those states. Because right now, the moratoriums and bans or the effective restrictions they've got in place is really denying Australians lower gas prices.
Oh, no, I understand that. But, I mean, part of the problem has been that I think the industry were pretty high-handed in a lot of cases in the early days. And I think the idea of marching onto farms when the farmer hasn't approved of it, doesn't know about it, they just march on and say, we've got the right. That, I think, just browned off a lot of people. And, of course,
I agree with you.
You know, if you want to brown off Alan Jones, it's not a very smart move. And, of course, he's been, you know, leading the fight against this thing. And you've now got governments pretty well spooked. Victoria doesn't allow anything. Here, it's a matter of seeing if the situation can be improved. But governments are frightened of voters, because it seems to me that voters have got the message that some of this stuff is pretty dangerous. I'm talking about fracking, and I'm talking about coal seam gas. I'm not talking about a big open coal mine. But it does seem to me to be a big problem, and we've got to do something about that. I mean, it's a matter of mindset, isn't it?
Well, I think that's right. And what we've seen, as you say, in Victoria, is them put restrictions not just on unconventional gas, which does involve fracking, but actually to put a moratorium to 2020 on onshore conventional gas, which doesn't involve fracking. Now, what we announced in the budget was a $90 million gas supply package, which includes more money to do the proper scientific testing of the impact of this gas extraction would have on the water table and other environmental considerations. Because the more evidence we can put out there, the more public confidence we can build. And in New South Wales, for example, the chief scientist did a report where she found that it was sustainable to do unconventional gas extraction. And as you'd be aware, in the United States, they've had the shale gas revolution in states like Texas, where they've had huge amounts of drilling, and it's been done in a way which has had the support of the locals. And to that effect, I congratulate what the South Australian government recently announced, which was to give more of the royalties that they would otherwise receive as a state government to the landowner, to the farmer, as an incentive for them to develop their gas reserves. And I think if the landowner can get more of the bounty from the gas exploration, we'll get a better understanding and a greater willingness to develop that important resource.
Oh, yeah. I mean, movements like Lock the Gate would struggle, I think, if farmers felt they were getting a reasonable deal, which they certainly don't think they've had in recent times. Now, when we say that we're keeping some gas, are there any export controls put on yet, or did we just announce that we could?
We announced that we'd be doing it by July, and that work is now underway in terms of preparing the legislation and working with the key stakeholders.
Okay, that seems pretty good to me. I didn't bag the policy when it came out. I think Malcolm got that one right, and I think the whole of Australia are pretty horrified about the amount of export we do. I hope, however, there's been some negotiations with Queensland, because they were worried that it was going to affect their budget bottom line in terms of, you know, royalties foregone. Have we sorted that out?
Well, look, Queensland is the success story here, because just over a decade ago, Peter Beattie was going to import gas to Queensland from Papua New Guinea. Then you had this explosion of development, and now 98% plus of the unconventional gas used in Australia comes from Queensland alone. But I'm very confident that Queensland will continue to earn the significant royalties, as well as ensure that more gas is provided to the East Coast. And let me tell you, the Victorian government, that are sitting on 40 years worth of supply, and the Northern Territory government, which is arguably sitting on 180 years worth of gas supply, should not be let off lightly. And you and I should continue to make the case for lifting those moratoriums so that Queensland doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting. Oh yeah, provided we've got some real control over the fracking. I mean, I do worry about water tables. I don't think you can dismiss the argument. I agree. And so we need to police that pretty thoroughly. Let's get on to the big question of coal. Now, I know you've been very supportive of the Adani mine
in North Queensland, the Galilee Basin. Unfortunately, Bill Shorten's gone a bit wobbly on it, which I've had a go at him for publicly, hoping that he'll come back, because I know that a number of his Queensland colleagues understand the situation. And I saw a transcript of an interview that John Fain did with you the other day. And I mentioned it in a piece I wrote in the Australian Today, and they even gave a little headline of one of my lines, which was that all he displayed in saying to you that no one supports Adani in North Queensland, I said, was the kind of southern ignorance that upsets Queenslanders so much. And it is, because there's great support for Adani in North Queensland, enormous support.
Well, it's important that people understand the facts. Now the Adani or the Carmichael mine is 300 kilometres inland. It's in a dry, dusty part of Queensland. And it has the potential to provide energy to millions of Indians who are now energy poor. And Australia's coal is lower in sulphur and lower in ash than the coal that either India produces or you get from Indonesia or South Africa or elsewhere. And so if Australia vacates this field, not only will we be foregoing billions of dollars worth of export income and thousands of jobs domestically, but somebody else will sell that coal into India, and the impact on the environment, could be worse in terms of emissions. So I've said very...
One of the problems there, if I can just interrupt, one of the problems there is that when it comes to climate change that everyone's so excited about, there's little evidence of climate change in the southern hemisphere. Most of it is in the northern hemisphere, where more people live, obviously. It's where, if we, Chinese and India together, there's a lot of them. I think people have got to understand that things are worse in the north. I mean, you saw the way the permafrost melted and did some damage to the seed vault the other day, because temperatures have been 7 degrees above normal. We don't have that kind of massive show in the southern hemisphere, and yet we seem to be the biggest activists on the question.
Oh, look, don't get me wrong. The Turnbull government takes very seriously its climate change commitments that were agreed at Paris, and we will meet them. And I have put in place a number of policies, so do my predecessor, Greg Hunt, whether it's the Emissions Reduction Fund or the National Energy Productivity Plan, or indeed I say it, the boost to renewables. That is all contributing to lowering our carbon footprint to the point where we have the lowest emissions on a per capita and GDP basis in Australia for 27 years. But I'm not going to sell out the coal industry that provides more than 40,000 people with employment and is our second biggest export earner after iron ore. Indeed, you could put all our wheat and all our wine and all our nuts and all of the exports that we do in that space, and it still wouldn't add up to how much we earn from coal. And in Townsville, there is unemployment at just around 11%. Compared to the national average of 5.9%. So you can understand why the people of Townsville and Mackay and Rockhampton and Charter Towers and Hughenden and Richmond and all these places, they want to see this mine built, and that's why I can't for the life of me understand why Labor's member for Herbert, Cathy O'Toole, has gone completely missing. She was happy to have her photo taken with Adani and the local mayor of Townsville when Adani announced that Townsville would be its headquarters, but she hasn't put any pressure on Bill Shorten, and she's been very silent publicly. And Bill Shorten can't have it both ways. He's either for jobs in northern Queensland or he's against the mine, and he's got to... Yeah, but you make a choice.
You'll notice what he's done is he's trying to not make a choice. He's trying to just let it flow by. He made some comments which were suggestive of a mild anti-Adani attitude, but he said nothing since. He just ignores it and hopes it'll go away. He's still trying to protect inner city seats from the Greens. And of course now you've got the same phenomenon, because Jackie Trad, who is the leader of the left in Queensland and the Deputy Premier, also holds an inner city seat, and they all worry about whether they're going to hang on if they approve Adani. But I think Jackie Trad's a pretty sensible and, well, she's a very bright lady. I mean, I'm sure she'll, in the end, come up with the right decision. But I just hope that you and the Queensland government both don't just talk about helping Adani, because we obviously we have to make sure this gets up. Now, I don't like suggestions out of Queensland that we're going to have a holiday on our royalties, because let's face it, I mean, any business plan for this mine is going to have to have taken into account royalties. I mean, there's just no way they haven't. And my understanding is that, it's getting down to a few hundred million now, not billions, that is going to be required to just polish this thing off. Now, what is the federal government prepared to do?
Well, the most important thing that we've done is we've assured that the Commonwealth environmental approvals have been put in place, indeed with many strict conditions, and the state approvals have also been done. As for what the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility decides about the rail line, that's a matter for that independent board. We can't tell them what to do. But in terms of the project and the jobs that it will have for the electorates of Dawson and Capricornia, and of course for Herbert, we've been very clear. Whereas the Labor Party, both at a state and a federal level, have been completely wishy-washy, and as you say,
oh, come
this
on,
is turning
that's
into
unfair.
a proxy.
Premier Palaszczuk has been right for this. She's been pushing it the whole way.
Jackie Trow's a deputy.
Yeah, well, she's the deputy. She's not the premier. There is a difference,
well, You don't see Barnaby Joyce. You don't see Barnaby Joyce and Malcolm Turnbull having a cigarette paper of difference between them. You see, this is Labor's biggest problem.
You just don't at the moment.
No,
you did, but not right now.
This is Richo, this is Labor's biggest problem. They're caught between their blue collar and their green thumb. I saw it down in Victoria with Hazelwood, with the drive by Daniel Andrews to triple the royalties on coal being produced and the 40% renewable energy target, and then the crocodile tears when hundreds of people lost their jobs and when electricity prices went up dramatically in Victoria. This is the problem.
But mate, they're going up dramatically everywhere. Josh, it's not just Victoria. If it was just Victoria, your point would hold. But they're going up all over the place. It's not just Victoria.
Well, can I just tell you that in Victoria, Hazelwood's had a major impact, but you've written about it numerous times, that the Labor Party has to go back to its base and start thinking about jobs. And there is a transition underway in the energy system, and we want to make sure it's smooth and consistent across the country. We don't want to see a repeat of South Australia, where 1.7 million people lost their power because of an ideological pursuit of renewables, 47% now in South Australia, without the necessary backup.
Yeah, well, I hate to have to agree with you, but I've been in print and talked about it so often, it'd be pretty hard for me to deny that I agree with you on that one. All right, so yes. I've got to leave it there. Thanks very much for your time. Don't kill too many sharks. Go a bit easy on them. And we'll see you soon, Josh.
Thanks, Richo, and let's put humans first. That's our #1 job.
OK, I think that's a pretty fair point. Josh Frydenberg in Canberra. I'll be back in just